Hello, so in this video we'll be unpacking the problem and examining how the lost ancient high technology industry actually works. Links will be in the description to the previous part where we were looking at the Christopher Dunn method of extreme cherry picking, where he was talking about the Serapeum boxes and that they're impossible to that there must be lost ancient high technology because modern companies can't do this. Now he has a letter, as we'll see there's another letter he has, but he went to the Truestone Corporation who make and said, well, make me a Serapeum box. My company did not have the equipment and capabilities to produce these boxes in this manner. My company would create them in the box in 5 pieces and ship them to the customer and bolt them together. However, again, you can see the whole video there, but in short, well, what does the Truestone Corporation actually do? And there brings in a very important point. The Truestone Corporation make granite surface plates and related items in that sense. They use granite to make very precise tools used in labs and engineering shops for straight edges, angles, and so forth. And pretty much all of it fits on a shelf. He did not go to speak to a mason, stonemasons who make large and small items to spec. It doesn't really mention the fact that historically these large single piece boxes were made of all sorts of stone including granite, and that in ancient, such as the ancient Roman sarcophagus of Saint Helena, which is again ornate sculpture all over the front of it, all over all sides of it, and it's a very large box and much more detailed than the Serapeum boxes, for instance. Or to even look at other sculpture works working in granite done by small teams, making just beautiful, astounding work, and then still projecting this idea that the Serapeum somehow must be lost high technology because modern technology cannot make it. This is an absolute nonsense. It is ridiculous claim to make, but more often I think it's deliberate, and it's the deliberate cherry picking where he chose, where he almost knew what answer he's going to get if it wasn't even scripted from the beginning, but to go to the worst company as a comparison. Truestone do not do sculpture, they do not do vaults or tombs. They make small pieces, but then it's sort of this, engaging specialists. To examine Egypt, we have to get the specialists. Well, that's the accusation they make of archaeologists and Egyptologists and so forth. But this is one clear example of extreme cherry picking where the Truestone Corporation was brought in. But now in this video we'll look further at another example where he gets a letter from a sculptor and it is extreme cherry picking. Okay, so the cherry picking, to talk about the Serapeum box, don't ask a stonemason, go to a granite surface plate manufacturer, the Chris Dunn method. And in this video we'll look at speaking about the colossal granite statues of ancient Egypt, and he went to a modern marble sculptor working with modern power tools and who does not do large scale sculpture. He completely ignored all the traditional granite carvers, and not just ones working in granite on a smaller scale, they still work in colossal scale granite. And again, it's not obscure to find this type of thing. It really is Wikipedia level research. Search larger sculpture, giant sculpture, granite sculpture, and that type of thing, and that'll be the focus of this video. And there's a lot to unpack in it. In these short statements that the lost ancient technology industry, they drop these things, but it's to peel this stuff back, you have to go into a little bit more detail, so it has to be long. Though before we begin unpacking, so there's no accusations of verbaled them or taken them out of context, we'll listen to this piece by Christopher Dunn himself speaking, and then go through the pieces and look at all the evidence, and to expose this cherry picking. And I wouldn't call it. I think it's deliberate. The level of the incompetence is too much to believe that it was unintentional and given the money factor. But anyway, we'll go into that. Let's listen to first from the man himself.
With the stone, I thought, well, I'm dealing with statues, I'm dealing with material removal, and I really should get the opinion of a modern sculptor. So I contacted a fellow by the name of Mike Leckie, And Mike Leckie does some beautiful work, and this is a marble, he calls it the bather. It's a marble statue. And I gave him, sent him some photographs and some text from the Ramses statue. And he wrote back to me, he said, well, thank you for this opportunity. I've been interested in Egypt and its sculpture since I was a child. As a stone sculptor, I can say that the granite of the Ramses head and figures is an extremely hard stone, and I believe tools much more durable than hardened copper chisels must have been used in the carving process. It would be necessary for me to upgrade my normal tools to carve such granite. My modern diamond blades and grinding points will be worn out before the head was even started. The ancient carvers must have had advanced technology. Although the ancient Egyptians had stone chisels and hammers which could cut extremely hard granite, even with an army of disposable labor, completing 4 large sculptures alike, exactly with hand tools, would take more time than we can conceive of as possible. Modern man with all his modern tools would be challenged to finish one Ramses in a generous timeline. Creating 4 of them, as large as they are, all the same, seems almost impossible. But this is a sculptor. But it could be argued, well, they didn't work on these statues one at a time, one after the other. They had multiple sculptors. And I don't know about you, but if you know anything about sculpting, it's a creative process. And yes, the sculptor does build a rapport with the piece that he's working with. And they need that creative element, creative freedom. So I seriously doubt that a sculptor or a series of sculptures were crafting identical Ramses all over Egypt.
Before we go any further, there's a few points because of a recent video I posted, and there amongst those quotes are so as a stone sculptor, I can say the granite of the Ramesses head and figures is extremely hard stone, no contest there. I believe tools much more durable than hardened copper chisels must have been used in the carving process. And then on, although the Egyptians had stone chisels and hammers which could cut extremely hard granite. Now I'll link those videos in the description because I go into what the actual ancient Egyptian copper was, and it wasn't pure hardened modern copper, it was arsenical copper and arsenical bronze. Those will be, but just to I sort of address that in a couple earlier videos, so just to deal with that elephant in the room before we go any further. Links in the description to that. And now let's return to unpacking this short letter and some statements that go with it. And again, takes time to go through these things. It's very easy to say this and to inject the idea and present this image. But when you scratch the surface and start peeling, not to mix metaphors, peel these things back, they start to come undone very rapidly.
With the stone, I thought, well, I'm dealing with statues, I'm dealing with material removal, and I really should get the opinion of a modern sculptor. So I contacted a fellow by the name of Mike Leckie. And Mike Leckie does some beautiful work, and this is a marble, he calls it the bather.
This is an episode of the show Artbeat Oregon, posted by the Leckie Sculpture channel because it features the sculptor Mike Leckie. That's the one that Christopher Dunn refers to and quotes in regards to working with granite, ancient Egypt and so forth. As we can see here, he works primarily with power tools. Now, I'm sure he knows how to use a rasp and a chisel, and there is in other videos featured on his channel you can see that he's familiar with those tools, of course, but he is a modern sculptor and a commercial sculptor in that sense as well. So he works primarily with marble and softer stones, and he's working with power tools. So that will be linked in there. There we can see Mike Leckie next to that sculpture reading girl. And again, I'll link this other video where you can see him working with a rasp and a chisel, but when it comes to his commercial work, it seems primarily he's working with power tools. He's not a traditional sculptor in that sense. Here is a screenshot of his page and a link to the exotic stone section, so primarily marble, but he does work with other stones. But he is not a granite sculptor. There are sculptures on granite bases, black granite bases, but as you can see there, it seems to be the type of thing you would uh, buy from a granite workshop. It's really just a disc of black granite, so that's the base, that's not the sculpture, and that itself is not a difficult thing to make with modern tools. But why approach a non-granite sculptor for advice on granite sculpting? I think the more important way, the much better way to do it would be to approach traditional arts and crafts and tradesmen. There are, it's a dying, these are dying arts, but there are still traditional tradespeople. For instance, the travelling Zimmerman, journeyman in Germany, traditional engineers and carpenters, or traditional Japanese katana makers, or watch and clock makers who still work with traditional ancient tools in that sense. So that's, I think it's much more important, much more relevant to go to traditionalists to talk about traditional techniques rather than a modernist working with modern techniques. Here's a clip of Arnaldo Costa, stonemason extraordinaire, by the David Webster channel. So I would approach him in regards to traditional techniques rather than Mike Leckie. Here's another clip of Arnaldo Costa, and I'll put that link in there, but we see traditional techniques, him splitting a large piece of granite with ease. An elderly gentleman, you can see in the other videos, he's not spry on his feet, but with traditional techniques you can achieve amazing feats. And when trying to compare primitive, let's call it, Stone Age technology, it'd be far more appropriate to approach people such as these rather than a marble sculptor working in marble when you're talking about giant works of granite, and we'll look further into that. This video is simply called Hand Carving Granite, again link in the description, but this gentleman is not a stonemason, he just decided to have a go at these things, and there's a very interesting comment and reply there, and he points to the fact that his chisel is a point. Chisels do not cut granite especially, and as he replies, yes, a point, or more accurately, a punch. I started granite by putting a block in front of me and then asking what I do next. Do the same, he replies. So again, granite chisels in granite do not cut, they punch, they point. They're fracturing, breaking the granite off into small little pieces. This is something we'll come back to later, and also I will be addressing the issue of steel versus copper chisels. This video will also be linked. Indian stone artist carving granite Nandi statue. If you watch the full video, you will hear in the background that they are using power tools as well, but we do see an illustration of the process of traditional granite carving, and something we'll look at further in this video. Modern tools are encroaching even on the traditional trades. That's just the nature of things, but I think it's very important, if we're talking about granite sculpting, to go firstly as traditional as we can, and to go to those who are working in granite, not working in marble. This is a portion from a video called How Indian Stonemasons Hand Cut Slabs of Granite for Design exhibition. It was an art exhibition, but she employed traditional Indian granite workers who make these flat plates so people have to grind their food in their homes. Ancient tradition, like lots and lots of this sort of stuff. We also see how these traditional masons work, granite workers. Rather than cherry picking a modern marble sculptor working with modern tools, I think it's much more relevant to look at more traditional people working with granite, and rather than, lost ancient high technology needs to ignore these, and they cherry pick a modern marble sculptor working with modern tools. When they talk about the Serapeum, they go to a granite surface plate manufacturer. These Indian sculptors are the heirs of older sculpture, large colossal sculpture, and they're still doing their work now. This is the one of the more recent Bahubali colossal granite sculptures, which again conveniently let's ignore these and look at others, but we need to examine a few features in regards to this and how the lost ancient high technology community ignores these. This colossal piece of granite was transported on top of a hill. Approximately 981 AD, the Gomateshwara statue, one of many, the Jain faith in India, about in the last 2,000 years, 1,000 years especially, about the only people still maintaining any sort of culture of colossal single-piece granite sculpture. 57 feet or 17.3 meters of granite, 10th century AD. This is in 2010. Another Bahubali or Jain sculpture, 41.5 feet, 12.6 meters. It's megalithic. It's a single piece of granite transported. Now, the trailer, now let's just clear that out so we see this trailer that was brought. So I've seen this on Ancient Aliens, but also it said, with modern technology you can't lift this, and this is evidence of features. Well, there's an important feature to remember about this is the roadway itself, and we go back to 330 ton as it stands now, when the Romans transported it across the Mediterranean Ocean. So these colossal obelisks, massive obelisks, weren't just transported a short distance to the river, then floated down the river and then a short distance to the site. Some places such as the Karnak Temple and these other places where you see these giant sculpture, obelisks, etc., the flood level is actually above their final placement. So when the flood comes, you could float it into position. So that's one way that these could have been moved in the past. But even if you're not including the flood, it's still a very short distance from the quarry site to the river, down the river, and then a very short distance from the river to the site itself. But that's basically the same weight as this levitated mass stone, which again is depicted in Ancient Aliens, Lost High Technology. It's pretty much, well, it's a bit of a debacle really, the way it's mentioned, because modern cranes, 340 ton crane is nothing. But we also, so this obelisk, amongst the other Roman ones that were brought in during ancient Rome, in the 16th century they were moved and re-erected. The Lateran obelisk and also the Vatican obelisk. And they, such as this lifting tower, was a reconstruction of the Roman method of how to do it. But also you'll see in the like they moved it on rollers. So when we get to that trailer, this footage is from 1929, and the moving of a colossal piece of stone. By the later on, I think it was whittled down to 250 tons, but initially it was 350. But even let's just use the lowest figure of 250. The point is that you'll see that they're using timber sleds to move these, just like the depictions in ancient Egypt. So you might have heard that timber can't support the weight, you need steel rollers, etc. Well, I don't need to bring up a engineering site with the stats on the wood. You can just literally see these people do it. And it's also important to notice that the sleds, the pieces that they use are rough. They're not squared off bits of wood as well, because that creates a suction effect as you grease it. So the way to do it is to use rough pieces of wood. And also it's important to note, as they're bringing this down the mountain, they're also going uphill in portion, so up and down. So that's where but inertia, once this block gets going, it's very easy to keep moving. It's just that initial shove that's really difficult to do. But also you'll see in the like they moved it on rollers. So when we get to that trailer, we have to deal with levitating mass. But again, the strength of wood is just remarkable. Now, dunnage, for instance, as they call it, when they these documentaries, mighty ships, etc. I was looking for a good quality picture of a much bigger lift, where they just put, basically railway sleepers underneath it, but I couldn't find the picture. But it's just commonplace, for these massive cargo ships. Even when they move oil rigs, you'll see the dunnage will, often just be laying timber on the deck. to stop the deck being damaged. Here's an example of rubber dunnage being used on ships. So this thing that you need steel, it's not true, not true at all. I'll put the link in Man vs. Granite Part 1 because there's some excellent photos from there, but you can see old granite being moved on rollers or even sleds. You know, there's just a couple of sleds, you know, touching the ground there. It's, again, this thing that you need steel rollers or, you know, that would crush underneath the weight, or the earthen ramp. These are just objectively untrue, remarkably untrue. But back to that levitated mass, which is often used as some sort of example. They did build a specialized trailer, but this trailer is absolutely overkill, and there was a reason for this, and that reason was insurance. This trailer was not necessary to support the weight. A couple of these steel bars would have supported the weight. A very small wooden frame would support that weight. What's actually happening here, you just have you know, these are big ones, but we sold this type of stuff when I was working in lifting and rigging. These turnbuckles are supporting the weight. It's not this trailer that's doing it at all. It's just this, you know, off-the-shelf, basically, you know, big turnbuckles. Gunner bow in the US, but yeah, but why was this trailer built like this, overweight, just for a 340-ton block of stone? Well, it was there to distribute the weight. Here's a 300-ton crane hoist. You could look up a 1,000-ton crane hoist, and you see you'll just have a few more wheels attached. All these wheels are not there to support the weight. They're on, you know, working cranes that move around. You can pick up your giant billionaire yacht and then drive it around the car park if you want to. So these dollies are not necessary. A couple of these dollies could have actually supported the weight. What's actually happening is it's weight distribution. You'll see these types of signs on the side of a highway, you know, or even on smaller streets, you know, no vehicles over 2 ton or 10 ton, etc. Two axle truck can take 8 ton, 3 axle ton 12 ton, 4 axle ton 16. So basically each axle is allowed to carry 4 tons, and that is to protect the road. Now the same thing would be with these type of massive. These wheels are not necessary to, like, the vehicle's not going to collapse without all these wheels on there. They are there to distribute the weight over the road, to travel on highways. Once the crane arrives on site, you know, what they'll do is they'll actually lift off the tires, and they'll place themselves on these mats to, again, spread the weight out. But even then, you can see that the not just the massive crane itself, but the weight it's lifting will just be supported by a few bits of timber. The reason for all these axles and these weight limits is because if you have too much weight on a wheel, it tears up the road and destroys the road. That's why these things happen. That's why they move them like that. On an asphalt road, 2-lane undivided road, through rural areas, 2 to 3 million, 3 to 5 million in urban areas, and if it's a 4-lane road, again, that's going up to large amounts. So when they're moving levitated mass, which again is 340 ton by modern tech, or even just old-fashioned timber and hemp rope, is no weight to bear at all. 106-mile route, and at the lower figure of $3 million, and it did go through urban areas, but just through rural, the minimum amount of damage it could have done is $318 million. That's almost 1/3 of $1 billion would have been what they would have had to pay to repair the road. So it's not the weight of a stone that required this, it was the insurance company saying, and the local government going, look, there's no way you're going to destroy our road so you can bring in a rock to decorate your museum. This trailer was oversized, overkill for insurance reasons. If the height, it would have been up to $330 million, not including possible damage to gas lines, electric lines, sewer lines, etc. under the road. So, you know, roads are not built with the idea of moving colossal stones in mind. They're built for economic reasons to support, you know, your standard car and trucks and transport. So that's the reason for these types of, $500 million, not including gas, etc. So it was insurance that was a reason for this, and that was why this trailer was as well, because they're going on an asphalt road and they were moving, I think, about 150 kilometers. So this is for modern roads, crossing power lines, sewage lines, electric lines, everything that goes with the bill would have just been massive, and no government or insurance would dare let you move that type of thing unless you're distributing the weight such as that. So it has nothing to do with supporting the weight. This is all about economics and insurance. So this colossal statue is 2010. One piece of granite. It's insurance, not the weight. Now Ashok Gudija, there is now talk of him making another one, which is 56 feet approximately, which would be equivalent to the Gomachwara we saw earlier, the absolutely colossal statue. But here in the background, an important feature is you can see his model. And it might be worth noting that his model is larger than the largest sculpture of Mike Leckie, who works again in marble and is cited as an expert in regards to working in granite and doing colossal sculpture. This would be the guy to go to, and traditional granite workers making much heavier stuff than what Mike Leckie is. But notice the Jain sculptures, symmetry is an important feature for them, and you can see how with this model he's been able to transfer it. So he's cut it right down the middle, the line of symmetry, and then he's marked it out in squares, and then from there you can transfer the information over to the large. You just multiply the measurements out, and that's a very simple, very ancient, very primitive technique, but it is very, very effective. Now, for instance, the simplest modern example would be when building inspectors, if you want to see what the wall is doing, you can't really tell by eye, you can't be accurate. And now you could get a laser scanner and to do that, but well, you could just also get a piece of string or a plumb line, hang it from the roof, and then just measure the distance from the wall to the plumb line. In dams, to measure the movement of dams, they still use this method. They'll hang a plumb line over a certain point, and every day they'll go and check and make sure the plumb line hasn't moved to show that there's no movement in the dam wall. Very effective, very ancient, and a great method. The plumb lines never run out of batteries. They never malfunction. It's very simple, but it's great technique. Now artists and sculptors now using a plumb line. Now, for instance, find the line of symmetry with the plumb line, and then you see, okay, that's the toe that it goes over, so I can follow that. Find the edge of his elbow, and that's where the other toe is, so now you can start to draw that. Or for instance here, where we have this sculpture, you hang that down the middle, and then you can start transferring that over. So whether you're drawing or whether you're sculpting as well, plumb lines and string lines and just a good old-fashioned tape measure are just very simple, very elegant tools that just work, and they don't malfunction, they don't run out of batteries. And so here we see, just a random example, hang down the plumb line and measure it from there, so you can tell the measurement. So using this method, you can transfer complex three-dimensional information, as long as you got your grid point, and then because it's a symmetrical sculpture, you just transfer it over in +3 to the left, -3 to the right, +1 outwards, +-1 inwards. It's a very simple, very effective, and brilliant method to I'll put the link into this video, the making of a marble sculpture, and it shows how the sculptor makes a clay and a plaster model, and you can see that and then he marks out certain points on the sculpture, and he uses a pantograph or a pointing tool, which is just working like a plumb line and a ruler. You just move the needle in and out, and then he moves the tool over to his piece of marble, and then you see those holes is where the dots are on this other sculpture. So they make a perfect replica of this complex three-dimensional asymmetrical as well. So it's not just symmetry is, if you can do one side, you can do the other. Asymmetry is much, much more complex than symmetrical sculptures are. Ancient tools such as like a plumb line and calipers, again, you can just easily transfer data over. It does not require, modern laser 3D scanning and stuff. It's the mason's eye, as they call it. Even a skilled tradesman can eyeball things just by practice, and then using a tool on top of that. So a caliper set like that, where you have it in the center, and then you can find so that would actually should have got a better one because that's a little bit off center, but imagine that line being straight out. And then you just have symmetry from the center point. Old-fashioned calipers, again, have a plumb line hanging down the middle, and then your calipers on either side. Simple ancient tools, just, they work great. This is a video how to use a pointing tool where it shows the same thing. With very simple, with wood, bone, copper, and string, you could make a pointing tool very easily. This is a Hermes of Praxitellis here in the Nicholson Museum in Sydney. It was found underneath running water, so it was that's all the erosion points on there. But it is a 1st or 2nd century BC copy of a 4th or maybe even 5th century sculpture, very famous one. And this ancient method was employed by Greeks and Romans to make exact replicas of very complex sculptures with all these flowing lines, complex, a living sculpture, not a symmetrical. Again, using lost ancient high tech, inhuman, where the features of these, Egyptian sculptures are not very well detailed. They are like a little bit plasticined over and simplified. But you can transfer this over with some very simple ancient techniques, and they work great. They work great all the time. All right, another important point: lost ancient high technology and Chris Dunn. These photographs were taken with a digital camera that was not surveyed. It was like handheld, let's find the middle. And then they were, by his own definition, they were photoshopped at that point. So when there is this, like precision, this is just not true, these measures. You cannot Photoshop and then use this type of measurement. That has to be properly surveyed. Firstly, the photo, if it was to be used that method, you would have to very accurately take that photo to begin with, and then you would have to use a proper program to take these sorts of measures. And even then, to get to these precision measurements, which are presented as some sort of, they're not measured. These are basically photoshopped. Again, by his own, he admits it himself. These photos were not taken in any sense that would be considered precision method, and so this is just all a bunch of hoopla. Really, if I was to apply this to any sculpture throughout history, and by using that same method, well, so what? You would find so many. But the important feature is, again, the Egyptian sculpture is not lifelike. It is by their own definition, lost ancient high technologists, it's simplified. The proportions of a body are changed so that it's easier, so that the elbows and the arms meet on the legs, and so there's not a gap between them, and these sorts of things. Egyptian sculpture is on the level of detail or just general sculpture. It really doesn't compare with the later. Now there are some lifelike ones which, very beautiful sculpture, but the ones presented as symmetrical, firstly, they're not anywhere near this measurement of precision, which it's just not true. But then they say, for instance, the Romans didn't do symmetrical sculptures. Too right, they didn't. They did asymmetrical sculpture, and here's some facts for you. Asymmetrical sculpture requires more information be transferred than symmetrical sculptures. I fiddled around with some 3D animation. If you make a complex asymmetrical wire frame and then try and process it, it's good. It crashed my computer because they were too complex. If I did a symmetrical with less data, less points to be transferred over, the animation would run through and wouldn't crash. It's just a fact that the more complex the shape, the more information is being transferred, the more difficult it is. It is just a fact that copying an asymmetrical sculpture requires more information be transferred than symmetrical sculpture, and it is laughable when they say, they didn't. Well, firstly, there are symmetrical sculptures, but the ones they put, a lifelike sculpture with all those details that give it the life in 3 dimensions, it's just a fact that it's more complex than symmetry. I can't really, it's unfathomable that they would present that as an argument. It is beyond ridiculous. But we'll come back to this in a moment. Now, Mike Leckie because he sort of contradicts Chris Dunn's own points about the artistic philosophy of sculpture. Mike Leckie makes copy, so he's one of his sculptures, but all of them you'll see on his site. Reserve yours now means that he makes a copy. How does he make a copy? I would be willing to bet he's probably using a pantograph or a pointing tool such as this, as other sculptors do to make their copies. But we'll come back to that because that's in that presentation by Chris Dunn, that like sculptors are sort of mystical things and it's purely artistry, and that sculptors don't work as a tradesman, who does jobs to spec. But then when people sculpt, it's this mystical, like, yeah, you never make a copy when you do a sculpture. You just you do it once and it's artistic, and you have this spiritual rapport with the stone. Again, pure nonsense. And Mike Leckie himself, all good sculptors and artists will make the copies. Some will be very precious and never repeat. But when it comes to sculpture, that's one of the skill of a qualified sculptor would be, make me a copy of this. Yeah, okay, you're highly skilled. That's something that you can do.
But this is a sculptor. But it could be argued, well, they didn't work on these statues one at a time, one after the other. They had multiple sculptors. And I don't know about you, but if you know anything about sculpting, it's a creative process. And yes, the sculptor does build a rapport with the piece that he's working with, and they need that creative element, creative freedom. So I seriously doubt that a sculptor or a series of sculptures were crafting identical Ramses all over Egypt.
Just interrupting, I think it's just worth reinforcing that point that as Christopher Dunn explained, the Masons have a artistic, mystical connection and rapport with the stone, and they do not make to spec. It's like, as my spirit guides me to make these stones, and I would not make copies. How dare the Pharaoh ask me to make 4 copies? Well, just to bring it up again, Mike Leckie, who he sought, and just like so many other sculptors, both in the modern sense but also in the ancient sense, they made replicas. It's a very skilled mason who would be able to do this, and stonemasons work to spec. You don't go to a builder and say, look, this is my design, I want the house, and he goes, well, my spirit being tells me I don't want to make it like that. You need it like this, type of thing. It's sophistry is what is brought up. It's just not true. Builders, sculptors, just trades, craft people in general, if they want to stay in the trade, they do as what is asked of them. And especially in the past, where the all-powerful king says, make me 4 of these, well, yeah, I'm going to make 4. You don't go to the king and say, well, I don't want to make a human sculpture today. I feel like, doing a dandelion sculpture, wait till I'm ready. No, not only you're not going to get paid, you're off to prison, if not to the gallows, if you have that type of attitude in the past. So Mike Leckie himself, he makes replicas of his artistic form, as it might begin with, and then he makes replicas. This is just what commercial sculptors do, commercial masons do. They make what is asked of them. You don't go up to someone and say, give me $15,000 to make what I want to. You pay for what you want to get. You're highly skilled, that's something that you can do. But back to, for instance, the Bahubali sculptures. Symmetry is a thing for them. Unlike other sculpture where it's asymmetrical, symmetry is important. But by using that same method of taking a photo, which wasn't even surveyed, or sort of eyeballed where the middle is, and then we cut it in half and then shape it over. But how many sculptures throughout history, large or small, would pass that same test of symmetry by skilled sculptors? Like, why do these not count? Well, of course they don't count, because it sort of ruins this mysticism about Egyptians had these supernatural skills that other people didn't. And as long as they don't tell you about them, and they say it with an authoritative tone, like, I've done my research and yes, I know about stone and blah blah blah. Well, uh, in all their years doing this and the thousands of hours of traveling and editing and writing, wouldn't they have like Googled at least a little bit? Wouldn't they have gone to an art gallery? Wouldn't they have looked at, like granite sculpture or giant statue? But no, it's important to keep it sort of in this, uh, with the blinkers on like a horse. You don't see anything to the side. You just look straight ahead. And that's an important feature that they present this, and people take it on good faith because they say it with such authority and um, um, apparent sincerity that it must be true. But again, it's here in the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney. These are just a few pieces, and especially this one, it doesn't really do it justice in the film. But the beauty of these art forms. But the point would be, if I was to analyse these in the same way that the symmetry, lost ancient high technology promote, how many sculptures, like smaller ones, okay, but also larger sculptural pieces, historically as well, before modern laser surveying type of tools, how many sculptures and statues and art pieces would fit this symmetry and before modern technology? I think that's if you don't include those, then why are these not included amongst this precision art form? It's not. So we go back to Ashok, who created this most recent Bahubali sculpture, and according to the article, maybe he's already begun. He's going to make an even larger one, about 56, 57 feet, which would be the same as this Gomateshwara sculpture as well. And again, here he is with this model, and this model, we'll do a comparison in a moment, but his model is larger than the largest Mike Leckie marble sculpture, and he made a colossal granite sculpture. This would be the guy to go to. Now, even in there were issues when they were moving the original block. The contractor screwed things up, and then they had legal issues. Who would be responsible to move it? The final basically got dropped in the yard outside his workshop, and he just got to it, and he said, okay, while everyone else was arguing legal issues, who's going to pay the bill, he just started sculpting with the chisel. And in the 41.5 foot sculpture is only 1 inch from the symmetry of its original design, even though he just, him and his small team started chiseling away at it while it was laying on the ground. So over 41 foot, even from an inch of symmetry, and again, he didn't have it in the position he wanted to make the super accurate symmetrical measurements, and he still got only 1 inch away from it. But using these very primitive ancient techniques, you can do this. It's just making identical copies or transfer over this type of information. Like, what's the difficulty in that? So that's the thing. Lost ancient high technology. They're always searching for problems that have long ago been solved. Whether it was, for instance, unfinished, that the Romans couldn't make a 60-foot long block of just like a rectangular block because they didn't understand how to use a string line or a plumb line. That's one of these things that sort of come up. But there's the most recent one. Okay, now this guy, he works in granite and he makes giant statues, and he uses a model larger than Mike Leckie's larger pieces. So that's, just to put it in scale, that's, the larger pieces by Mike Leckie. This guy's model is bigger than that. So these were granite people working in granite who make giant statues would be the ones to go to when you're talking about giant granite statues historically, not like a marble sculptor who works with modern tools and works on a small scale. He doesn't work with granite. So firstly, and he doesn't work in that scale or that size. So this is This is a perfect example of this cherry picking. The previous episode in regards to this was Christopher Dunn going to True Stone Corporation to make granite surface plates, granite metrological pieces that are used on tabletops and in engineering shops and labs. They don't make giant sarcophagi or even small sarcophagi for that instance. And here's another example. Christopher Dunn, he ignores all the traditional granite carvers, all the ones who make larger pieces, and he goes to a modern sculptor using modern tools working on a smaller scale. This is the stuff they don't want you to know. So they present it cherry-picked to present this, this research, detailed information. I'm an engineer type of stuff, and they don't want you to know. So again, these are not random people on the internet. These are self-professed researchers or authors who charge large amounts of money to good people who take it on good faith that they know what the hell they're talking about. And again, it's either utter incompetence or sheer laziness to do any research outside of what they want to believe. And again, given censorship, it's not incompetence. It's very clever keeping suppression of important things. So it's impossible without lost ancient high technology type of argument. Now notice the similarities in the sites that they visit, but even in the it's like they got the same art department. It's like there's a big, the prices are basically the same. All the tour, I wouldn't be surprised, with a little bit of digging, that even the hotels and travel, buses and ships and stuff like that. It's a nice company. Now, if you ever watch these lost high technology videos, and I wish I could ban them but Gaia TV is one that comes up, and it's the truth is being suppressed. Pleiadians and Atlanteans, to take ayahuasca and you will achieve enlightenment. They always, lost high technology, ancient aliens, and this Gaia TV have the same threads running through it. It's impossible with modern technology. It's impossible with historic technology. Therefore, forbidden past. There's a suppressive element working. The establishment is there to suppress. We're truth seekers. We're fighting. We're David versus Goliath. We're fighting for the truth. Well, stuff they don't want you to know. So, follow the money. This is Gaia TV, their shareholders. Who do they include amongst their shareholders? BlackRock. Yes. Once you scratch the surface with these, another one would be to look into the important mainstream, the main gurus in this group, and look to the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Follow the money, but BlackRock is there. So follow the money. These people who say, I'm fighting the establishment, I'm a truth seeker, we're going to liberate you. Liberation. They're not fighting the establishment. They friggin' work for the establishment. Follow the money with these things. This is, again, another element of the stuff they don't want you to know. I've been wanting to actually go into this because there is a diabolical spider's web of, whether it's David Childress and all these other people, it's an incestuous network linked to some really rich and powerful people, and they claim to be like these, the underdog. No. They work for the establishment. They are the establishment. The Google, YouTube algorithm, etc., just loves them. Whenever they get so much free airtime when they come to do a speaking tour here in Australia. You see them on the mainstream, morning shows and midday shows, and they're promoted by the establishment so heavily. So this idea that they're freedom fighters, liberations, fighting for, but no, they are the establishment, and you can just again follow the money with these people, and that's what it's all about. It's about money, and I could bring up a Kurt Gödel quote in regards to. Yeah, but I won't go into that, and I don't want to go into this area because it is sort of murky or whatever. But if you want to go down a rabbit hole, start looking into who owns certain companies. And it's a spider's web of links between these types of people. I know it's unpopular maybe because you don't mention David Icke's a good guy or Graham Hancock's a good guy. Well, who owns The Economist magazine, for hell's... Anyway, let's move on from that, but if you do want to go down there, follow the money, and it's a dirty, dirty web of incestuous network linked to some of the richest, most powerful organizations in the world. But back to this Bahubali sculptor. Again, this project was not one with the backing of a powerful king. It was essentially a community project, and that's an important feature because, unlike the pharaohs or Ramses or who would, they controlled a nation. They were all powerful. You know, if they wanted a big stone from a quarry, they didn't have to pay top price. They said, cut that for me, I want it, deliver it, and people had to do as they were told. Unlike these more recent ones, so it's an interesting point to consider. So let's look at the Granite, one of the Bahubali sculptures. The Jains seem to be really into making these colossal granite statues, not so much for other peoples. This one goes to the 10th century AD, and just get an idea of the colossal size by look at the feet. So these people are standing a little bit back from the statue, so it doesn't give you quite the true scale of how large it is. It is colossal. It's megalithic by any definition. But because it's from a later period, let's not talk about that. Now compare that to the Ramesseum and one of the broken, collapsed colossals there. And again, clearly it's not a cataclysm. It's fire setting. This is how it was broken. But the original height, descriptions vary because again it's been broken, but anywhere between 51 to 62 feet. So this Bahubali transported on top of a hill. Remember, Egypt is very flat. So unlike moving megaliths in other parts of the world where it's hilly, it's very flat in Egypt, and all these places are right next to the river as well. So you just barge them down from Aswan Quarry, and the current of the river will do most of the work. So when they say they were moved 500 kilometers, but the more truthful description will be how far was it moved from the quarry to the barge, and then how far from the barge to its final location. And we have records from ancient Egypt describing how they moved obelisks. They put them on a barge, floated it down the river, and again, as I mentioned earlier, in some cases during the flood season, you would be able to float it right to its location and just wait for the water to go down as well. But this is slightly smaller or slightly larger than these colossal statues in Egypt, made of granite too, and symmetrical as well. Alright, so now that's the one, the move in 2010. Now it's standing, and just roughly 41. So that's, I might be a little bit over, a little bit under, but this is a colossal megalithic work still being done now. 1973, another one of the Bahubali sculptures, 39 feet. 42 feet in the 15th century. Early 17th century, 35 feet. Others will say 38. I used the lower number. I always use the lower numbers in these cases if there is a discrepancy. And so these are megalithic. And some are very modern, and other ones go back through the centuries as well. But just, why are these not, in that sphere? The Colossi of Memnon. This one was Cambyses by fire and iron, and it was so these blocks here are sandstone. We still see, you can again see the fire setting damage from there. That's still in the original pieces, but again very much damage. Colossi of Memnon, 60 feet in total, but a 13-foot pedestal, so 47 feet. And just as with these early ones, I didn't include a pedestal. I'm just including the height of the actual statue. And so if you put the Colossi of Memnon there, the Gom at the Shwara is larger than the Colossi of Memnon in height. Now, because the Colossi is seated, it does have added bulk, so the weight would be heavier. But I've also some of the estimates of the weight. I've sort of tried to run the numbers as best I can. It seems to be exaggerated quite often. But megalithic works, some very, very modern, some going back a few centuries, one going back a millennia. But why are these not, celebrated and let's look at these and, and look at how these were done and compared to the Colossi and so forth in Egypt. And again, the ones done by the Jains were community projects. They were not by an all-powerful pharaoh who could just, dictate what he wanted to be done. He didn't have that he could summon armies. He had a whole nation. The Nile Valley is a huge territory, creating vast amounts of food. It fed the rest of the Mediterranean Empire, for instance, exports from Rome. Very rich, very powerful. They extended their rule over into current day Israel and Lebanon, so that they could import Lebanese cedar and other goods in there as well. But yeah, when you put these in comparison, it's sort of like, well, we should, these master researchers, traveling around the world charging people money. Why would they not have just like done a little bit of Googling? There are also two at Tanis. Now the exact heights, because it's only small pieces of the hole are left, some will go that one was 60 feet high. Again, just a couple feet short of the Gomadeshwara, and this 57-foot one is I'm not sure if it's gone through yet, but there was one of the patrons for the Jains was proposing to make a similar one in similar size, and some estimate there was another one at Tanis that was 92 feet, but unfortunately we don't know in that case, because how was it? Because we only have small pieces left. But either way, this these colossal pieces surely would be an indication. Impossible, therefore lost high technology. Well, possible. So again, what were the ancient Egyptians viewed? Were they silly? Were they stupid? Could they not do the things that everyone around them was doing? And that it's very confusing. There's the primitive Stone Age people didn't know how to work stone sort of trope that is connected with this, and again the things they don't want you to know. And this is I'm not looking into some obscure sources that only we special billionaire Google. This is usually Wikipedia is my starting point when I do this type of research as well. So it's first page results: giant statue, granite sculpture, granite sculpting. That's the sort of level of research it really does involve. India is the home to a tradition of granite carvers that are still working today. Megalithic works are still being made today. The ancestors of the traditional carvers still working, in some cases only one generation ago, still working now in other cases, but these sculptors, these people would surely be the ones to go to get your opinion on giant granite sculpting, rather than go to a marble sculptor working with modern tools whose largest pieces are smaller than the models used to create this most recent Bahubali sculpture, and the symmetry involved in these sculptures as well. So it's curious, very curious. This is a statue of Ahimsa. Now, including the 13-foot pedestal, it's 121 feet, so the actual sculpture itself is 108 feet, currently the record holder. So 108 as well. Anyway, but so the Mike Leckie letter to Chris Dunn. Although the ancient Egyptians had stone chisels and hammers which could cut extremely hard granite, even with an army of disposable labour, completing 4 large sculptures like that with hand tools would take more time than we can conceive of as possible. Really, why? Even with steel chisels, stone does not have this. It's still hard. It's difficult work even with steel. Stone tools work fine. I'd prefer steel or modern tools, power tools, if I had to use them, if I had the choice. But like, what is this with, I'll put the links from the last few videos. If you actually get a stone pounder and start pounding on granite, they're actually quite good tools, and even with a steel is not mystical. Just, granite yields before it like, a hot knife through butter. It's still hard work. But then he goes on to say, modern man with all his modern tools would be challenged to finish one Ramesses in a generous timeline. Rubbish. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense that, modern man with his modern... No, we would be, if we put our effort and our modern resources in a large scale with an all-powerful king, we would just be pumping these things out. Creating 4 of them as large as they are and all of the same seems almost impossible. No, not at all. Now, firstly, this Ahimsa, this was not moved. It was created in situ because it was on top of this holy mountain site, very important site there. But it also involved moving massive amounts of stone. So you can sort of see from there, and also the stone had to be moved down. And even though it's India, you wouldn't compare it to modern, America, English, and Australian regulations. Probably got a little bit more flexibility there, a little bit of in the back pocket, but they still had to move the waist down rubble roads. So and India's really in the last couple of decades really moved along in terms of developing economy and so forth. But now to make a copy of them, so it goes back now. Modern man with his modern tools would be challenged to finish one Ramesses in a generous time. Well, what is a generous time anyway? But no, absolutely not. With man with his modern tools, we'll just be pumping these things out, and creating 4 of them as large would seem almost impossible. No, it wouldn't. Modern surveying, just even using a plumb line and string line and just calipers, these older tried and tested techniques of surveying, what's the difficulty? Using modern laser scanning equipment, we get it down to fractions of a millimeter to scan these things out, take the measurement. So it's on the radio, yeah, another 3 mil, keep going, yeah, down a little bit more. You have a few, just like we saw that pantograph of a pointing tool. You don't need to do every single spot. There are a few key points, and then you just smooth them down and follow it out. So modern scanning laser tools, we would make replicas, like true precision replicas of true precision, not Christopher Dunn definitions of precision. I mean actual true precision. And with the modern cutting tools like that, that we have, automated CNC tools. If you look, just Google CNC stone carving and look what these types of tools can do, let alone big scale ones to move. If you throw, instead of like these Jain statues, which are essentially community projects, they're not nationally funded or regionally funded with this all-powerful king saying, I want it done, get it done. It's a different world now. But with these machines, no, we'd be no. It's okay. So what if there was a nation with an all-powerful ruler that threw a lot of research, a lot of resources at making monuments? Google's North Korea monuments actually have an industry of making massive monuments for other countries as well. And so we see, granite's not a problem, but the giant ones of old, now we're making colossal, bronzes. And this is the Statue of Unity in India, 597 feet. The Great Pyramid, tallest structure for that long a time, is 481 feet. Hello. We know what we can do with modern tech. I mean, have you seen what a phone has? How far our modern technology is miniaturizing things and, delivering what they could only dream, beyond the dreams of the ancients, we now carry around in our pockets and take for granted, and miniaturized. And so again, just look up giant, like how many examples could I bring up in regards to this? What modern technology could do in this. So firstly, it's diminishing ancient technology and what people can do with primitive tools, and they do brilliant stuff. Even now, modern people have been replicating it to try and sort of battle this, lost ancient high technology, ancient aliens, Gaia TV stuff. But and then it's diminishing. Like, do they not? Modern tech, man, the infrastructure projects that we are currently undertaking are just on, just at work at this time, and the amount of materials we're moving and the complexity of these systems, and that modern technology couldn't carve a granite box, a granite or a colossal statue, which can be, again, everyday, not even building a special crane, just standard everyday working cranes could lift all of those colossal statues in Egypt at once. Like for instance Tyson, and that's an everyday working crane, and it's not the biggest anymore. But this is, I can't. I have to say that it is like remarkably so way off base. It's do they? But firstly, the main point being cherry picking. So looking at these, these sculptures, let's ask a guy working in his back shed in Portland with marble and softer stones using modern tools and get his opinion on granite and colossal statues instead of colossal granite statue makers that are still at work today. So there you have it. That's the cherry picking method, where we talk about the Serapeum boxes. We get a granite plate surface manufacturer. When we're talking about colossal granite statues, we get a modern marble sculptor. And I'll put the links in the description, because if you're going to talk about granite, wouldn't you go to a traditional granite worker rather than a marble sculptor? And if you're talking about colossal granite statues, wouldn't you go to a manufacturer of colossal granite sculptures? So to review the main points of that letter from the marble sculptor Mike Leckie to Chris Dunn in regards to giant granite sculpture. As a stone sculptor, I can say that the granite of Ramesses' head and figures is extremely hard stone, no doubt, and I believe tools much more durable than hardened copper chisels must have been used in the carving process. Links in the description to a recent video talking about arsenical copper, and that the actual copper used by ancient Egyptians is not hardened modern copper, it's arsenical copper, and actually arsenical bronze in that sense, which is comparable to milder or even medium carbon steel. So but even then, steel is, as I showed in that video, even hard steel, it's a hard material to work. So whatever tool you're using, whether it's steel or whether it's stone tools, it's still hard to work. There's not some super advantage that you get from these things. So they actually had more durable than hardened copper chisels. They had hardened arsenical bronze tools. In that same respect, also, so although the ancient Egyptians had stone chisels and hammers which could cut extremely hard granite, well, yes, they could, and they did, and in their depictions they actually show it. But then he says, even with an army of disposable labour completing 4 large sculptures alike with hand tools would take more time than we can conceive of as possible. Well, I can conceive of it as possible. Experiments have shown that even just grad students, noobs at that point, could get 18 cubic centimeters of granite removed per minute. So they can, a small team removes a huge amount in a few weeks or a few months or spending a year. Huge amounts of granite are removed by stone tools. And what's inconceivable about that? Well, I have to insert this.
Got very good arms.
He didn't fall? Inconceivable. You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Also in this letter, he states, modern man with all his modern tools will be challenged to finish one Ramesses in a generous timeline. Creating 4 of them as large as they are all the same seems almost impossible. To that I would just say, no, absolutely not. Are you not familiar with modern tools, modern surveying equipment, the precision that goes into large infrastructure projects, the large monuments that have been made which dwarf the Great Pyramid and absolutely dwarf the largest granite sculptures in antiquity, the size of even just 1,000-ton hoist cranes that are used in shipping yards to, which could move these and move them around, and the cutting tools, and again the surveying tools. Modern man could pump these out if they wanted to. Anyway, so in the bottom there we see Mike Leckie working on the Reading Girl, one of his larger marble sculptures, working with modern tools. And this is the, the expert sculptor cited to talk about colossal granite statues. Let's not look at the granite colossal statue makers still in operation today. Let's look at a small scale marble sculptor with modern tools. But he says it would be necessary for me to upgrade my normal tools to carve such granite. My diamond blades and grinding points would be worn out before the head was started. The ancient carvers must have had advanced technology. Well, previously he stated that the stone tools work. Egyptian depictions show stone tool work. Other people who are using stone tools in experimental archaeology are showing that these work. So that's where is this evidence? These things that modern man cannot do, this can't be done, must have had advanced technology. We must accept, when ancient Egyptian sources talk about the deep past, we must accept that literally. But when they actually show depictions of them doing their work, and we find the tools scattered across Egypt, and why can we not accept? Why is this so hard to accept? Why must they have had advanced technology? So again, if I wanted to know about granite sculpture or colossal granite statues, I would ask someone who's still doing this. If I wanted to know about traditional stone carving granite techniques, I'd go to someone who's still working in those techniques. If I wanted to know about what stone tools can and cannot do, I would look to people who use stone tools, because modern granite sculptors are using steel because that's available to them. But there are experimentalists who go and use stone tools and make impossible trihedral corners, stone vases, hieroglyphs, and all these other features. So when they say let's look to the experts, and Egyptologists, archaeologists aren't engaging the experts or the engineers, so forth, well, right back at you. Yeah, this is cherry picking, and it's just like with the Serapean boxes and True Stone Corporation. It's again cherry picking a modern marble sculptor working on a small scale, rather than looking to Ashok Gurijar or to the Erevan Temple. I'll put a bunch of links again to the Erevan Temple, especially because they went out of their way as much as is legally possible to use traditional techniques and old school sculptors as well.